Honra estar aqui com Mike Rezendes, um jornalista de investigação norte-americano, de ascendência açoriana, só da parte do pai, a mãe, a descendência franco-canadiana. É um jornalista que trabalhou no Washington Post, noutros jornais, até que chegou ao Boston Globe. Chegou e pouco depois de ter chegado a este jornal de Boston, trabalhou numa equipa de investigação, a equipa de investigação Spotlight. Durante vários meses investigaram um caso de abusos sexuais na Igreja Católica de Boston. Essa primeira investigação, essa primeira história foi publicada em janeiro de 2002, teve uma tremenda repercussão nos Estados Unidos e não só. Levou depois que fossem feitas muito mais histórias pela mesma equipa no mesmo assunto, portanto a investigação prolongou-se e Mike Rezendes e os outros elementos da equipa Spotlight em 2003 ganharam o prémio Pulitzer. Em 2016, Spotlight tornou-se o nome de um filme baseado no trabalho de investigação da equipa Spotlight do Boston Globe, um filme que obteve o Oscar de melhor filme em 2016. Nós vamos ouvir uma apresentação feita pelo Mike Rezendes. Depois disso haverá perguntas, algumas minhas, e também, enfim, será aberto a todos os jornalistas que queiram participar e que queiram fazer perguntas ao Mike Rezendes. Ele estará aqui para responder algumas dessas perguntas, claro. Mike Rezendes, thank you to be here in this meeting. Congratulations for the Pulitzer. And I think we are ready to your presentation.
All right, thank you. So I want to thank everyone for being here today and attending this gathering of the Congress of Portuguese Journalists. Of course, you know I'm Mike Rezendes from the Boston Globe, and I want to say that I'm still a member of the Boston Globe Spotlight team, fighting the good fight like all of you are. Before I begin, I just want to say special thanks to the organizers of the conference and to Nuno Pinto for making the often complicated arrangements to get me here. And I also want to thank the staff of U.S. Ambassador Bob Sherman. He's someone I knew in Boston, and appreciate the efforts of his staff as well. You know, I noticed that a few days ago, how could I not notice that former Prime Minister and President Mario Schwarz passed away. And I wanted to just say a little bit about him. I have not followed politics in Portugal as closely as I should have, but I always admired Prime Minister and President Schwarz for his commitment to democracy. Of course, as other people have said here earlier today, journalism is an essential component of any democracy, whether it's here in Portugal or in the United States or in any other part of the world. Because without good journalism, and I mean journalism that holds powerful people accountable for what they do and what they say, citizens will never have the information they need to make decisions about their elected officials and others who hold powerful positions in public life. So I want to commend all of you here for maintaining your commitment to this truly noble profession, especially at a time when the future of journalism is threatened as never before. I'm telling you honestly, the efforts that you are making to ask your public officials tough questions and to give a voice to the powerless among us, and to provide a measure of justice for those who haven't had any. True democracy does not stand a chance. I know that after I complete my remarks, many of you are going to watch the movie Spotlight. I assume many of you have seen it already. Is that true? So that's great. You know, to my mind, Spotlight really perfectly illustrates the need for aggressive, credible journalism in a functioning democracy. And I just want to assure you that the movie is really accurate. It's just a remarkably authentic portrayal of investigative reporters who were taking on a big institution. Of course, Spotlight takes a 5-month investigation leading up to our first story, and it compresses it into 2 hours. So there are shortcuts, and there are some composite characters. The other thing I should tell you is when the movie ends, it's the first day of our series, and in fact, we worked for another year, publishing more than 600 stories until the Archbishop Cardinal Bernard Law, who was the senior Catholic in America, finally resigned. But as I said, despite all that, I think the movie really is an accurate portrayal of how we work and the obstacles we had to overcome to produce our stories. As you know, Spotlight is open to really great acclaim all over the world. Even Vatican Radio gave it a positive review. And a year ago, Spotlight won the Oscars for Best Screenplay and Best Picture at the Academy Awards. But because all of you are journalists, I wanted to talk a little bit about the investigation that inspired some very talented people to come and make the movie. The first thing I want to say in that regard is that, of course, the Spotlight team did not discover clergy sexual abuse. There were scandals in other parts of America, maybe half a dozen very big scandals in America, and I assume in other parts of the world. So we didn't discover this issue. In fact, the Boston Globe had covered a big scandal involving a priest who was a serial molester 10 years before the Spotlight team came along. But there are a number of things that made our work very different from anything that had come before. And I just want to go over some of those. One was that we discovered the cover-up. I mean, you may have heard the old saying, the cover-up is worse than the crime. And that was the case here. We discovered that the very highest church officials in Boston and America, including Cardinal Bernard Law, knew that a priest by the name of Father John Gagan had spent 30 years molesting more than 150 children in 6 different parishes, and nevertheless allowed him to continue working as a priest, putting more and more children in jeopardy. So the cover-up was number one. The second thing that was unique about our story is that it was based on the church's own internal records. So we had documents from the church's own files, and that was very powerful. That made our story bulletproof. In other words, nobody could question the veracity of what we were reporting. No one could say, hey, this is fake news, because everything came from the church's own documents. The third thing that was unique, and this was only unique because it was 2002, is that we posted our stories and the church documents online. Now, if you remember 2002, there was no Facebook and there was no Twitter, but it was really the dawn of the internet era, and a lot of people were using the web. And I think because we posted our stories online and the all-important church documents, this story went viral. I think this is the first piece of investigative reporting that went viral, thanks to the internet. The fourth thing we did that was different is we were able to get a handle on the scope of the problem. I mean, previously, there had been scandals involving one priest, and the church would always say, well, this priest is just a rotten apple in the barrel, and most priests are really, the vast majority of priests are not child abusers. But we reported that there were 70 priests just in the Boston Archdiocese who had been credibly accused of molesting children and young people. And by the way, that number has now risen to 250 just in the Boston Archdiocese, priests who've been accused of molesting children since about 1950. So then I guess the question is, well, how did we do it? How did we do this? How did we produce the stories that shook the world and won a Pulitzer Prize? And again, I have to say, it's really very accurately portrayed in the movie. And that's to say that really none of it would have happened without Marty Barron, who was our editor at the time, and he's now the editor of the Washington Post. And it really did all begin on Marty Barron's very first day of work. And what had happened is that early that morning, before coming into work, Marty had read a story in the Boston Globe. It was a column by an opinion columnist. And the columnist noted that there was a local attorney who had filed a series of lawsuits on behalf of victims of Father John Gagan. And she also wrote that the judge in the case had granted a request of the Catholic Church and put all the records under seal. There was an impoundment order. And she wrote, the columnist wrote in her column, "The truth may never be known." And I think for Marty, those words were a red flag. Marty believes, and I believe, and I think all of you believe, that it is the job of a journalist to find the truth and never accept attempts to cover up the truth. So then two things happened. Marty decided that the Boston Globe would go to court to challenge the confidentiality order, and the other thing he did was he asked the Spotlight team to start looking into the matter. So the four of us on the Spotlight team, we went down to our dingy office downstairs from the newsroom, and we started calling sources. And we found out pretty quickly that we were not just dealing with one priest, that there might be, we thought, as many as a dozen. Could it be a dozen priests? We thought that would be an amazing, incredible story. So we launched a two-pronged effort. One was to find out how big the problem was, and the other was to go deep on the case of Father John Geoghegan and to learn as much as we possibly could about John Geoghegan and his career. And I was the John Geoghegan guy. And so that meant, as you see in the movie, that my first objective was to win the confidence of a lawyer by the name of Mitch Garabedian and to win his trust. And it was very difficult to win his trust because the Catholic Church had filed several complaints against him. The church was trying to have him disbarred and deprive him of his means of earning a living. So Mitch was very, very frightened, to put it mildly. And it did take a long while for me to earn his trust, and I did that primarily through interviewing his clients who were victims of clergy sex abuse, often in very emotional encounters. And eventually, Mitch told me that he was able, through a legal maneuver, to get some of these sealed records in the public file, but that the records had been cleaned out. Essentially, someone stole them out of the clerk's office on the church's behalf. Eventually, I was able to get those records, and they were very, very explosive indeed. There was a letter from a bishop to Cardinal Law complaining about another assignment for Father Geoghegan, saying that he had a known history of homosexual involvement with young boys. There were also other letters to Cardinal Law from parishioners complaining that although they had been assured John Geoghegan would be taken out of service, he'd been seen in the neighborhood wearing his clerical collar and taking out young children for ice cream. So at this point, I had the documents that proved there was a cover-up. And just at about that time, we won our challenge to the confidentiality order in court. And that meant we were going to get all the records in the Geoghegan case, some 10,000 pages of records. And meanwhile, we had made a lot of progress in measuring the scope of the problem. So the result of all these things coming together at almost the same time was that in January of 2002, we published 4 blockbuster stories that triggered a tidal wave of scandal and swept the country and then the world. And I think the two most important stories of those 4 were, number one, the story proving that this was a cover-up that went all the way to the top of the Archdiocese and the senior Catholic in America. And the second earthquake was the story reporting that there were 70 priests who'd been accused of molesting children. I got to say, none of us on the Spotlight team ever thought our work would become a Hollywood movie, and for many years it didn't. We published our stories in 2002, and the movie people didn't come along until 2008. And we were surprised because we just didn't think our work was very cinematic. I mean, I remember we were sitting down with the producers and somebody said, "Hey, wait a minute. You want to make a movie about a bunch of disheveled journalists hanging around in a dingy office reading court documents? You have to be kidding." And even now, I marvel at the movie's success. You think about it, there's no car chase, there are no explosions, there are no firearms, there isn't even any sex. So how could a movie like this ever be successful? And all I can say is we're really lucky that some very talented people came along who were really committed to producing something authentic. And their commitment was shared by the costume designers, the set designers, and the actors. I remember Mark Ruffalo coming to my home for the first time, and he walked in the door and he sat down and he opened a notebook and he turned on his iPhone and he started asking me personal questions. You know, for instance, I thought he was going to ask me how I did my job, what were the techniques I used, but no, he wanted to know why I was an investigative reporter and, as he put it, lived alone like a monk. And, you know, Mark just really learned a lot about me, and he even dressed the way I did in 2002, and I think produced a really convincing portrait of me. Same is true of all the actors. I think they were very excited by the prospect of playing people who were alive and that they could study. And also, I think they were very excited about a movie that actually means something. Finally, they could get involved in a movie that was not another action adventure picture or another comic book superhero movie. This was something that really meant something, that affected a lot of people. And I think that came through, I really think that came through in the movie. You know, earlier I mentioned that the movie won 2 Academy Awards, and that was really a great honor, and it was also a lot of fun. We all went to the Academy Awards ceremony in California, and it was just a year ago, and as I say, it was really quite a lot of fun and a great honor. But, you know, I have to say that those of us on the Spotlight team, who were on the Spotlight team back in 2002, we really love the movie for some different reasons. And we love it because, number one, it says a lot about the need to keep public attention focused on the issue of child sex abuse in the Catholic Church. You know, it's been 15 years since we published our stories, almost to the day. And 15 years since we proved that there was a cover-up in the Boston Archdiocese. And now we know that that cover-up was worldwide. And since then, the Church has said some very nice things about accounting for abuses of the past and about preventing abuses in the future. But I think that many of the survivors of clergy sexual abuse are becoming a little bit skeptical at this point. And I'll just cite a couple of examples. Pope Francis has established a commission to study the issue of clergy sexual abuse. And he also announced that he would set up a tribunal to hold bishops accountable, the bishops who cover up for their priests who are sexual abusers. But it's 3 years later, and the commission has yet to release any findings or any recommendations. And Pope Francis recently announced that there will be no tribunal to hold bishops accountable. Instead, he made some changes in canon law that he says will make it easier to discipline bishops who cover up for priests who are molesting children. But many of the survivors believe that this is really simply backpedaling and capitulating to the bishops. So I think there's a real need for journalists to keep public attention focused on the Catholic Church to make sure that it delivers on its promises to do everything in its power to prevent more sexual abuse by priests. The other message the movie delivers that we think is so important is that it really shows the necessity of having strong, credible investigative reporting in a democracy, the importance of having reporters acting as a watchdog in the public interest, protecting people who have no voice, protecting people who have had very little or no justice. But today, as you all know, and as some of the earlier speakers said, this kind of journalism, the kind of journalism you see in Spotlight, is really in a state of crisis. You know, I can tell you that at the Globe, we've actually increased our commitment to investigative reporting. In the movie, you can see that there were 4 of us on the Spotlight team, and right now we have 8. So we've doubled our capacity. Thank you. And I want to make a couple of points about that. It's not as if the Globe is doing better than a lot of other newspapers. In fact, even though we've doubled the number of reporters on the Spotlight team, at the same time, the number of reporters overall at the Globe is half of what it was 15 years ago. So we're in a very serious situation as well. So the question is, why did we double the number of reporters on the Spotlight team when we're facing the same crisis as everyone else? The first reason, of course, is it's the right thing to do. delivering accountability journalism to readers and viewers and listeners is our primary responsibility. Holding public officials and powerful institutions accountable is our moral responsibility. But here's something else I'd like everyone to consider. We also doubled the Spotlight team, the size of the Spotlight team, for business reasons. We have very good metrics now on what people are reading on our website, bostonglobe.com. And we have found, and we've done readership surveys, and we have found that our readers love Spotlight. And we have found that when we publish a story, that readers spend a lot of time on the stories. And we're also able to determine now, because of these online metrics that we have, that Spotlight stories are driving subscriptions. People read a Spotlight story, and then they subscribe to the Globe. So investigative journalism, I believe, and I have evidence to prove it, does make economic sense. And I urge all of you to go back to your editors and tell you that. I think editors right now are cutting their investigative staffs all over the world. And the reason seems pretty obvious. I mean, investigative reporting is expensive. There's no doubt about it. Marty Barron has estimated, just back of the envelope calculation, that it cost $1 million to produce our stories on the Catholic Church. But still, I think editors who cut their investigative staffs are being penny wise and pound foolish, and perhaps even worse, because the first year of the cuts, they will notice a savings and they'll pat themselves on the back and think they're doing the right thing. But I think in years 2, years 3, years 4, they're going to find that their readers, their listeners, their viewers are going to desert them because they're no longer providing people with the kinds of stories people actually want. And secondarily, I'm also saying that I think investigative reporting can enhance a news organization's revenue stream. If investigative reporting is going to lead to more subscriptions, that says a lot. Subscription revenue is more important than it's ever been. Since we don't get much advertising revenue anymore, we at the Globe, at least, and I think other publications, are looking for more subscribers. And we're getting them in large part because of the Spotlight team. So I think that's really an important point. And of course, you know why we're facing this crisis. We're facing this crisis because of the internet. And I have to say the internet is a wonderful thing, and all of us have a lot of new tools to do our jobs because of the internet. There are so many different opportunities now to do investigative reporting with things online. The access we have to records is phenomenal. It's much easier to find people than it's ever been. It's so much easier to do legal research. Often we can sit at our desks and research a legal case, whereas before we'd have to travel to 4 or 5 different buildings and gather paper records. It's remarkable. But as you all know too well, the internet has destroyed, and I mean literally destroyed, the revenue model for news organizations. I don't think everything is entirely bleak. As I said, I think investigative reporting can actually generate revenue. I think there's a lot of experimentation going on with a nonprofit model. In the United States, you may have heard of ProPublica, or the Center for Investigative Reporting, or the Center for Public Integrity. And these are organizations that solicit donations to do the work of investigative reporting. And they do pretty well. I don't know if it's a model that can be sustained in every major or medium or small city or municipality, but I think it's an interesting experiment, and I hope it produces great results. As I said, there's also a lot of experimentation going on with new revenue models. Newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Globe are very seriously trying to increase subscription revenue because the advertising revenue is disappearing. So I think the bottom line here, though, is that all of us, even though our heart and soul may be in the news or in the investigation, all of us are going to have to start thinking about how to be entrepreneurial and how to generate new revenue to support the important work that we do. Because the stakes, they really could not be higher. The choices that all of us make in order for our democracies to work have to be informed choices. And if journalists like us are not around to hold powerful people and powerful institutions accountable for what they do and what they say, believe me, no one else will. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Mike, for your ideas, because I think it's really important for us to have new ideas, new guides, and it's very interesting to hear you saying that investigative journalism could be, has a future. And do you think so? In the digital field like
I do think investigative reporting has a future one way or the other because people want it. I think the demand is really quite high. And that's why I'm urging people to start experimenting with raising money through investigative reporting. I think also, in terms of the nonprofit organizations I mentioned, you know, I think investigative reporting to a lot of people, it's kind of sexy, and they want to be involved with it. And if they have a bag of money, they're willing to fund it. So I think investigative reporting will survive in one form or another. I really do believe that. You know, a lot of the surveys show that what people really like when they go to the web for news is they like the short, quick stories about breaking news, and they like long-form journalism. Not just investigative reporting, but long stories that tell powerful stories through people. There really is a demand for that. There's a lot of evidence to show that people want that kind of reporting. What readers don't want, it seems, are what we spend a lot of our time doing, which is the medium-length stories about day-to-day developments, let's say, in the court system or at City Hall, that kind of thing, which I think is important. But still, I do think there is a strong appetite for what we do, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to monetize that appetite.
Mike, what made you become a journalist?
Well, I'll tell you, I initially thought when I was a university student that I would become a novelist. You know, I was a literature student. But I was trying to write a novel, and it was clear to me that it was going to take a while, and I wasn't even sure I could do it. And I needed to make a living as soon as I got out of the university. And so I really liked to write, and I was very, very interested in politics. So I came upon the idea of trying journalism because it would give me practice writing, and I could indulge my interest in politics. And so while I was still a university student, I began working for a small newspaper that was doing investigative reporting in a low-income neighborhood in Boston. And it was a terrific match. I mean, I remember I walked into the door of this office. It was a storefront operation on the street. And I felt immediately right at home. And a week later, I published my first story. And it was a thrill. You know, it was really a thrill to see my name on a story that really meant something. And eventually, this particular newspaper was fighting for a lot of causes on behalf of people living in a low-income neighborhood. The airport was expanding, so we were fighting airport expansion. We had an arson problem, so we were investigating arsonists. And you know, I saw that our stories were having an immediate impact on people's lives. And that really grabbed me. You know, I realized that through journalism, I could really make my community a better place, and maybe the country a better place, and maybe the world a better place. And that's really what motivated me at the very beginning, and it's what motivates me today. I mean, if I weren't convinced that doing another Spotlight story would make life better for a significant number of people, well, I don't know, I'd go out and try to make some money somewhere, you know?
In this investigation of the sexual scandals in the Catholic Church, what were the most difficult thing in this investigation for you?
Well, you know, there are two kinds of difficulties. One was listening to the stories of the victims of clergy sex abuse. I mean, they were so sad and so, frankly, enraging. It was hard to listen to people describe how their lives had been destroyed over and over. And as I said in my talk, you know, a lot of the initial encounters I had with people were really quite emotional and devastating. And of course, the other difficulty, the huge difficulty, was proving what we believed to be true. You know, we believed that there was a cover-up of a priest who had been molesting children for 30 years in 6 different parishes. And everything came down to proving it. And everything came down to getting our hands on those documents. Everything came down to getting the church's own internal records. And to this day, when I'm doing an investigation for the Spotlight team, I always want to see the documents. Show me the documents. Show me the records. I want.
Without documents, you don't write anything.
Well, I usually don't write anything without documentation. And I never write a story based on anonymous sources. I mean, forget it. You know, I want people to know that when they see the Spotlight logo on a story by Mike Rezendes, that they can go to the bank on it, that it's absolutely true.
It's a brand.
It's a brand. The Spotlight is a brand. And that's another, by the way, important point in marketing, investigative reporting, if you want to try this. It really helps to have the Spotlight brand. You know, if you, none of us went to business school, I don't think, maybe a few of us, but if you do go to business school and take a marketing course, they'll tell you how important the brand is. So if you want to try this experiment, it would be a nice idea to have a logo or a brand of some kind for all your big investigative pieces. And people will get used to seeing that brand, and they'll associate it with accountability journalism. And I think that will help. The Spotlight brand really means something.
Mm-hmm. And what kind we are between journalists? What kind of techniques do you use?
Well, it's a good point because, you know, I think it's very kind of trendy to do data journalism, and I think there's a lot of great stories to be done through data journalism. But to me, data has to have a purpose. It has to be used for stories that really mean something, that really matter. I mean, I don't think data for the sake of data is particularly interesting. I think if you have data that proves that there is systemic wrongdoing in a public institution, well, that's good data. The other thing I think it's important to note, and I think this is one of the great lessons of the movie Spotlight, is even though we have so many tools on the internet, it's really, really important to get out of your office and to get out of the chair and to go meet people and talk to them face to face. You will learn things that you never imagined. And I think there are a lot of people you will think will not talk to you, but if you go out and actually meet them, you'll find that they will talk to you. You know, I think often people have information that you desperately need for a story, as was the case in our investigation of clergy sex abuse. And, you know, making a personal connection with someone will often persuade them to help you get the information you need. So I think good old-fashioned shoe leather reporting is really still very, very important.
Mm-hmm. And when you are in investigation, when do you think that it's time to stop? I have enough material, it's okay, let's publish it.
That's always a tough question, but one of the guides that I have is what I call when you enter the echo chamber. In other words, when you start hearing the same thing over and over again, maybe you have the whole story or enough of it to put into your newspaper or your radio or television show. So I wait till I don't feel like I'm discovering anything new. If I'm working on a story and every few days I'm discovering something new, or every week I've made a new discovery, I know I'm not done because I'm still discovering things I didn't know that are relevant to the story. So as long as I'm still discovering things that are new, I always have the feeling I need to keep going.
And how do you deal with the competition?
Well, that's a very interesting question. You know, when we were, as you see in the Spotlight movie, I was very concerned about the competition. And, you know, it motivated our decision to publish when we did, quite honestly. I always took the competition very, very seriously. But these days, unfortunately, there's not a lot of competition. And, you know, I still want the Spotlight team to be first with everything. But it's not as hard as it used to be. I don't worry about the competition as much as I used to because there simply isn't very much of it anymore.
Mm-hmm. And why that? Because there's no revenue or
well, exactly.
There's no investment?
Well, it's because most news organizations have cut their staffs so
mm-hmm.
significantly that they're not able to replicate our work or to compete with us. If they get a tip on what we're doing, they just don't have enough people. They don't have the bodies to be competitive on a story, on an investigative story.
Mm-hmm. And in Boston Globe happens the opposite. That is, the team is now 8 persons.
Yes.
And that was because of the movie?
In a way, it was. I'll tell you what happened is, you know, we had the traditional Spotlight team with 4 people, and the Spotlight projects were taking a long time, sometimes up to a year to produce a project. And it was Marty Barron who said, well, we also need a second investigative team to produce shorter turnaround stories, because there's a lot of investigative stories that don't need to take a year, they don't need to take 6 months, they might need 6 weeks. So Marty established a second investigative unit, and what we did is we merged those 2 units, and that's how it became 6. And where the movie gets involved is there's a company that provided most of the financing for the movie. It's called Participant Media. And they're an interesting company because it was set up by a very wealthy individual who made a lot of money at eBay. And he set up this company to produce movies and other media projects that are in the public interest. So that's how Spotlight got funded. And Participant Media believes that there should also be follow-up to their projects. So because of that, Participant Media is financing a Spotlight Fellowship, and they provide the financing for, right now they're providing the money for 2 reporters to work with the Spotlight team on an independent project. And by the way, we were just accepting applications for this fellowship. I don't know if they're closed or not, but you know, first it was going to be for 1 year, and now we're in the 2nd year. So make a long story short, the company that financed the movie is also providing money to the Spotlight team.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And how was the relationship with the Spotlight team, the movie? When you talk about Mark Ruffalo at your home, but in the newsroom, how was it?
Well, it was pretty exciting, I think, for people. It was really exciting to have a movie crew walking around the newsroom and to have some Hollywood stars walking around the newsroom. And I remember taking Mark, introducing him to some of the editors, and I walked around the newsroom with him, and it took us about 45 minutes to get around the whole newsroom because everybody wanted to take a selfie with him. And Mark is, in addition to being a great actor and a very, very dedicated political activist, he's also a very big-hearted, generous guy. And I can tell you that everybody who wanted a selfie got one. So.
Okay. I don't know if there's questions from the audience. I can't see
a thing.
anything.
But now I can. So do we have any questions? I'd be happy to take all comers.
Okay, up there. Okay.
Aqui em cima, acho que a luz não é grande coisa, mas I try to speak in English even if my English is not very good.
It's very good.
Thank you. My name is Antonio. Generally, I write about religion, and I thank you very much for your job in the Globe, also because it was very important to our profession and also to know, to make the church more transparent and to know the truth about an important subject. For me, it's also very interesting because the same newspaper, the Boston Globe, that has published this story had created 4 years ago a website named Crux to cover the Catholic Church. And the Globe, has hired a journalist from CNN to lead this website. Now Crux, as I know, it continues as an independent site. Here in Portugal, religion is not an important subject to our editors, except when it's related with terrorism, sex or money. So I would like to ask you if you could tell us a little about how do you work in the Boston Globe with the religious affairs. Thank you.
Just give me that last part again. How do we work with what?
Religious affairs.
Religious events?
Affairs. Religion.
Affairs, I see. Well, We have a reporter who's a religion reporter, like you. That's all she does is cover religion. And it's a very big beat. I mean, of course, in Boston's the most Catholic city in America, so covering the Catholic Church is part of her beat, but also she's written a lot about Islam and Judaism. So, you know, we cover that beat pretty thoroughly. Crux is not part of the Boston Globe anymore. It was envisioned as a revenue producer, and it did not work out as a revenue producer. So John Allen, who was the primary correspondent for Crux, he managed to get independent funding from the Knights of Columbus, and he's now running that on his own. But we still, without Crux, we still are dedicated to covering religion. As I say, not only the Catholic religion, but other religions. And if, you know, if we discover a scandal within a religion, whether it's the Catholic Church or a different religion, then probably that reporter would not write the story. Probably it would go to the Spotlight team. And I've written stories about sexual abuse in other religions as well. But to answer it's a long answer to your question, is we do it the way you do it. We have one reporter who's dedicated to covering religious affairs.
Did you grow up in a religious family? You had a religious education?
Oh, sure. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic family. I mean, we went to church every Sunday. We did not eat meat on Fridays. My sister, my sister went to Catholic school. I went to public school, but I went to religious instructions once a week, catechism classes. So, you know, my family on my father's side, as you know, is Portuguese and from the Azores, a very devout area. And also my mother is French-Canadian, and they're also very devout Catholics. So, so yes, I have a very strong Catholic upbringing, and frankly, there are a lot of very good things about it. I mean, I don't regret my Catholic upbringing at all. In fact, I think I learned a lot growing up as a Catholic.
Mm-hmm. And was it important for your investigation in these scandals in 2001, 2002?
Yes, I think the Catholic background was important. As a matter of fact, you know, I was telling you earlier that the church investigation was this particular Spotlight team's second story. And when I joined the Spotlight team in 2001, it was a whole new, everybody on the old Spotlight team was out, and they brought in an entirely new group of people. And so we had done only one story before our investigation of the Catholic Church, so we didn't even know each other all that well. The team, you know, there were four of us, and we were still just getting to know one another. And there was a point early on in our investigation of the Catholic Church where we were sitting around discussing the story, and we realized that all of us had been raised Catholic. Mm-hmm. And I think it was to our advantage, and that is because I think we understood, just to give you one example, we understood the natural deference that Catholics would feel toward priests. For instance, many people have asked me, well, how could anyone leave their child alone with a priest? And of course, the answer is, well, the priest is the most trusted person in the community. The priest is the one person you would leave your child alone with. So I didn't really have to puzzle through that. I mean, that was all intuitive to me. You know, how could a single mother allow a priest to come into her home and put her children to bed, for example? And, you know, there are a lot of people who just can't understand how any responsible parent would do such a thing. But I understand it very well. You know, here you have a single mom with 4 kids who needs some help, and along comes a priest to help her. And number 1, she needs the help. Number 2, she's very flattered by the attention of a priest. And number 3, and this is what I think people who are not Catholics don't understand, is the priest is the as I said, the most trusted person in the community. So I didn't have to be puzzled by any of these things. None of us on the Spotlight team did. We understood intuitively how this could happen. We understood intuitively how a single mom raising children on her own could be vulnerable to a predatory priest.
Mm-hmm. There's any other questions?
Tenho aqui, posso? Sou eu. Aqui? Hi, Alexandra Machado. Sorry for my English also. I want to know if you had any failure. You said the brand was important. I want to know if you had any failure before and after printing a story.
If I had any what?
Failure, any wrong article or story.
In other words, did we print anything that
Mistake.
was there any mistakes?
Yeah.
No, in our first 4 stories, there were no mistakes. And that was really, really important. Because as I said, Boston is the most Catholic city in America, and the church is a beloved institution. And there were a lot of Catholics in Boston who really didn't like the Boston Globe because the Boston Globe had editorialized in favor of abortion rights and in favor of contraception. So there were a lot of Catholics who were ready to criticize the Globe and who were very, very skeptical of the Globe in general. So it was really important that there be no mistakes. I mean, none. And in those first stories, there were no mistakes. As I said in my talk, after the movie ends, we continued our work for another year, publishing 600 more stories until Cardinal Law, the Archbishop, finally resigned and fled to the Vatican with 2 law enforcement investigations ongoing. And in some of those stories, yes, there were some errors. I remember once I wrote a story about a priest, and the desk ran the wrong photograph with the story, and there was an instance where we reported on abuses committed by a priest, and this was a priest who had the same name as a abusive priest, but a different middle initial. So that's a story that we had to correct. But you know, those are the only 2 cases I can think of that were inaccurate in more than 600 stories. And as I say, in those first 4 blockbuster pieces that must have been, I don't know, 20,000 words or something, there were no mistakes. And to do that, as you all know, I mean, that's a lot of work and that's a lot of pressure.
How did you live that moment when you published the first story in January 2002? That day, the 6th January?
Yeah, January 6th of 2000.
How did you live that moment when you saw your story published on the front page?
Well, again, this is, the movie is very accurate in this respect. You know, there had been protesters, every once in a while, still to this day, we get protesters in front of the Globe when people object to a story. And we all were sure that we would get to work that day and there would be protesters in front of the Globe. Absolutely sure. And just like you see in the movie, Marty Barron ordered extra security, and there was an extra receptionist where all the telephones are. And you know, we got into work and there was nothing. You know, there was no protesters. There was nothing. And we thought, wow, this is so strange. And you know, it's a little bit different than in the movie because we went down to the Spotlight office, and I was there with Walter and the other members of the team. And for a short period of time, because it was early in the morning, it was just dead quiet. It was just dead quiet. There were no protesters. There was nothing. It was such a strange, eerie feeling. And then the phone rang. And then another phone rang, and then another phone rang, and before you know it, the phones were ringing off the hook, just like you see in the movie. And we had to get we have interns who work on the city desk taking phone calls, and we had to get the interns on the city desk to come down to the Spotlight office and start answering the phone. And it was very, very important because a lot of the phone calls we were getting were tips about more priests. Mm-hmm. And so we needed to collect all this information very efficiently and very thoroughly. So we had the interns and ourselves taking phone calls and typing up everything. And at the end of a very, very long day that was kind of a mind-blowing day, I mean, the material we collected that day would just, A, break your heart, and 2, blow your mind. And you know, Matt Carroll was our computer geek, and he put all the stuff that we got into one big file. Mm-hmm. And then we just started going through the file and organizing it by priests or different categories. And then that day and the next day and the next day, I mean, the phone just rang for days and days. And that information that we collected really informed a lot of the reporting that we did over the following year.
Okay. Mm-hmm. More. There's one.
Yes. Anybody?
There's one
there. You go. Don't be afraid. Okay, right there.
Hello. My name is Silvia. I work from the Portuguese news agency, Agência Lusa.
Oh, very good.
Officially, next year you will have a new president. I want to know how will be the relation between the press and the White House. Is it going to be a challenge for journalists?
Oh, I think it'll be a great challenge. You know, one thing I can promise you, at a bare minimum, is that everyone's going to be very, very busy. And there's going to be a lot to report on. There's going to be a lot to write about. And I think there's going to be a huge appetite for news. And so, you know, in a way, I would say that's the good news. You know, I think covering Donald Trump, we'll have to wait and see what it's like. I mean, he has said some contradictory things about the press. You know, during the campaign, he said he would try to have the libel laws rewritten so that it would be easier for people to file lawsuits against reporters and news organizations. And there was an incident where he was making fun of a New York Times reporter who has some physical disabilities. Donald Trump denies that he did that, but there seems to be a consensus of people who were there that he did do that. You know, on the other hand, I think Donald Trump is an avid reader of news and an avid watcher of television news, and I think it's hard for me to believe he doesn't understand the role that the media plays in our society. So I don't know. I think it's too early to tell exactly how he's going to react. But I do believe it will be a challenge to cover him, and it will be really interesting every step of the way.
And what do you think, Mike, about what happened yesterday and the day before yesterday with CNN and BuzzFeed? They published that information about the Secret Services, and Donald Trump denied that. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, I personally was a little distressed by that. I think BuzzFeed went too far because it published specific information that it did not corroborate. You know, I was saying earlier, you know, I always like the documents. I want the documents. I want everyone to believe that whenever
BuzzFeed published a document, 35 pages of a document.
Yes, but the document was a summary of things that people had said. You know, there wasn't any hard information to back it up. In other words, the document was a collection of rumors, it seemed to me. Now, maybe the rumors are true and maybe they're not. I think it would have been better to try to prove some of those things before rushing to publicize them. I think it allows Donald Trump to be very critical of the media and to continue to believe there's a liberal bias. And also, I think the part that hurts the most is people are, at least in America, are skeptical of journalists, and they become skeptical of what they read. And I think a situation like this makes them more skeptical than they already were. So I think we as journalists, we have to be aggressive. We can never back down. We have to demand the facts. We have to demand the truth. But I don't think we should publish until we know that the information we have is true.
Okay. More questions?
I have a question for you. My name is Inês Batista. I'm still studying for my master's degree. And I wanted to ask you for your advice to get those tips and those stories that you were talking about when you're a freelancer. Do you have any kinds of tips or things that you should do to get stories that interest people?
Yeah, I do. I think developing sources is important. You know, I'm not sure exactly what your situation, but what your situation is, but it matters. I think it would be a good idea to try to develop a relationship with one news organization so that you can cultivate sources among the people who either read that website or that newspaper or watch that television station or listen to that radio station. I think developing sources is very important. And that means, as I said before, it means talking to people and interviewing them, sometimes in very informal situations. You know, I think if you meet someone who you think has information that would yield a really good story, then, you know, take that person out for a cup of coffee. I mean, or a drink. You know, I say that I never want to publish anything that isn't true or that I can't document in some way. But that doesn't mean I don't talk to people anonymously. I mean, I grant people anonymity all the time, so they'll tell me their hunches, so I mean, I'm happy to hear about rumors. You know, I want to hear all the rumors. But I'm just not going to publish until I can prove it. But what I'm saying is, I think it's important to develop sources and to develop relationships with people who might have access to information that could lead to good news stories.
And Mike, what are you working on now? What kind of subject, can we know?
Sure. You know, I've been working for a couple of years exposing conditions at a state prison that houses men who are mentally ill. And I discovered that the guards killed one of the mental health patients. This was a young man with schizophrenia. He was 23 years old. He'd never been convicted of a crime. He was only at this institution to be evaluated psychiatrically. He'd been charged with misdemeanor assault and battery. And I also discovered that there was a cover-up of this young man's death, and I exposed the cover-up, and with documentation, by the way, with a lot of documents. And as a result, the commissioner of the Department of Correction was fired, and 3 of the guards have been indicted on manslaughter charges and are scheduled to stand trial later this year. Also, on a related subject, I also was part of a Spotlight Team project where we investigated the state's overall mental health care system, and we found some really shocking things, not just anecdotes about people whose mental illness is untreated, but we did a lot of research that proved that more than 10% of the homicides in the state of Massachusetts are committed by someone with a serious mental illness that has not been treated. So, and we also found that nearly half of all the police shootings that are fatal, in other words, nearly half of the fatal police shootings involve people with a serious mental illness. And the point is that all of these deaths could have been prevented if we had a good mental health care system where people with a serious mental illness can get treatment. And that was a project that lasted most of this year. And it was a 7-part series, and we just completed that just a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay. More questions?
There's a hand way back there. Oh. I could listen to this.
Yes, if you want.
Hello, my name is João. I work for the public radio. I wonder if you can give us an idea of the percentage of stories you start investigating, and then at the end of the day, it's no story at all. And also, even if you are 8 today, I imagine you have lots of tips, of stories. Which are the criteria that you apply to choose what stories to investigate?
Yeah, those are very important questions. I'll take the second one first. You know, because the criteria matters. I mean, a lot of people call me or send me emails about, frankly, some terrible things that have happened to them, and often, almost always, I'm sympathetic and I would like to do something for them, but I'm not going to invest my energies in a story unless it's emblematic of a systemic problem. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to investigate something unless it's affecting more than one person. And usually I'm not going to investigate something unless it's affecting many people. I look for stories that reveal corruption or wrongdoing in institutions, whether they're government institutions or companies, corporations. or nonprofit organizations, you know, I'm looking for systemic wrongdoing, and that's an important criteria, because people call and they're understandably disappointed that I'm not going to look into their story, but that's the reality. You know, I can't invest 6 months of my time for one person. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. And also, my goal is to not solve everyone's problems. You know, my goal is to make our society a better place. And that means I look for stories that affect significant numbers of people. So that's the main criteria. And as for when to know when to stop so that you don't go down a rabbit hole and never come back, that's very, very important. And you know, I can tell you that earlier in my career as an investigative reporting, you know, I might spend more time than I should looking into something before deciding there was nothing there, or there was something there but we just couldn't get it. You know, I think, again, the criteria for whether to spend more time on something is, you know, sometimes a good tip comes into the office, and the first question is, I mean, it might be a great tip, and the first question is, yeah, it's a great story, but is it true? And then the second question is, even if it is true, can we get it? You know, do we have a realistic chance of proving this to our readers? Because that's what's important. You know, there can be a story about systemic wrongdoing. We know it's there, but we just can't get it. And once you come to that conclusion, you have to get out and not spend too much time at it. You know, I think at this point in my career, I've been on the Spotlight team on and off, mostly on, for about 15 years. So I think I've gotten pretty good at deciding deciding whether there's something there pretty early in the game. I think a lot of that is it's experience, but also, maybe even more important, it's knowing what your criteria are.
More questions?
Hi, I'm Anna. When you talk about spotlight investigations have success, public success, what kind of issues are public interested in? That's one question. And the other one, you were talking about your compromise with the professions, always demanding documents, and don't make a story just based on anonymous sources. Is it easy to defend that kind of position and commitment in the newsroom and with editors and bosses? What kind of struggle do you have in your daily life, and other colleagues too in the newsroom, to maintain that compromise and go live it every day?
Well, the main struggle I have with editors, you know, when I tell an editor I have a good story, the first response is always, oh, are you writing yet? You know, when can I have it? And so I have a very good relationship with my editor, the editor of the Spotlight team, but very often if I'm working on a good story, I'll have to tell you, since we're all reporters here, we don't tell anyone. We don't tell the higher-ups until we get closer to being able to produce it, because we don't want to have that kind of pressure. So often we'll just sort of work among ourselves and just keep it to ourselves until we're, you know, reasonably certain we can produce the story within a certain period of time. You know, the other tension that used to exist is, I think the implication of what you're saying is maybe there's some envy or jealousy or resentment on the part of other reporters in the newsroom because they have to produce a story every day, and, you know, there's Mike Rezendes taking 6 months or 8 months to produce a story, and isn't that unfair? And, you know, I think that was real for a long time, but recently, you know, as I said before, we now have these amazing metrics. For example, I can go online right now on a particular website that's not available to the public and that was structured for the Boston Globe, and other media use this particular website. It's called Chartbeat, if anyone is interested. But anyway, I can go onto this website and I can see how many people are reading the Globe online, how many people are reading bostonglobe.com. I can see which stories are being read the most. This is in real time, so I can tell, well, there are 4,522 people reading this story, and there are 2,058 people reading that story, and there's only 27 reading that story. And the average person reading that story is spending 4.5 minutes on that story, or it's only spending 27 seconds on that story. So the metrics are incredible, and when we first got this tool, I got to tell you, I was scared. You know, I was really, really scared. You know, I thought, this is the end. You know, we're going to get this thing, and no one's going to be reading the Spotlight stories. We're done. We're cooked. And so I was very worried. But as I said before, to my delight, I found out that the Spotlight stories were really, really popular to the point where we can argue that the Spotlight team is a revenue center. And I think once that information became known, I think any resentment among other reporters who may be jealous of those of us on the Spotlight team who can spend a long time on a story really kind of disappeared, because frankly, you know, at this point we all want to survive, and that's what we're in. We're in a battle for survival. So I think everybody now, we all have these metrics, and I think everybody now wants to support the stories that are popular with our readers and that are generating subscriptions because it's going to save everybody's job. So I think that kind of resentment, although I think at one time it did exist, I think at this point that's disappeared just because everybody understands that the Spotlight team is not just here for a moral purpose, but it's here because we make good business sense.
And Mike, what kind of person can be an investigative journalist? With what kind of skills?
Well, I think the first skill is very, very simple. You know, I think you have to be a good listener, number one. I think you have to sincerely want to know what people have to say. You have to have, I think, a sincere curiosity about people and their lives. And I think, you know, when you're developing sources or you're trying to get information out of someone, if it's clear that you actually want to know, and you're not just there because of a professional responsibility, you're not just there because you might have an assignment or a deadline that you're trying to meet, you're there because you really want to know. I think that kind of sincerity comes through. So I think being a listener is really, really important. Having a natural curiosity about how the world is put together, I think is really important. And I think thirdly, I think a capacity for outrage is important. I think you have to have the capacity to be angry at the injustices you may discover. I mean, one of the things that motivated us to do the church story, you know, I said that it was very troubling to have to listen to people's stories of sexual abuse. But on the other hand, I think the stories we heard also made us very, very angry. And that anger and that capacity for outrage really motivated us to work as hard as we could. So I think a capacity for outrage when you encounter moral injustices also is important.
More questions?
Hello, yes. Hello, good evening. My name is Diana. First of all, I want to congratulate you for your amazing job. I wanted to ask you something not related to investigation, but on another topic that I struggle a bit lately, and it has to do with the reporting on terrorism, because unfortunately it has been lately the main story on our radios, TV stations, and newspapers. And I wonder, the other day, the day of the Berlin attacks, I was watching the news on a German channel, and I saw that reporters were reporting on nothing because it had just happened. And I work for a rather small station, and even in the small stations I realized that the news about terrorism, the comments, the discussions below quickly shift from terrorism to racism and so on and so forth. And I wanted to ask you if you think that this kind of reporting, which sometimes is a bit excessive, is doing actually more harm than good.
Well, with all respect, I don't think I know if it's doing more harm than good. I mean, clearly, when there's an act of terrorism, we have to report this. We have to report it as thoroughly as we can. What I would hope is that after the debris is cleared away and people are taken to the hospital and perhaps buried. I hope that there's still an investigation of that particular act of terrorism so that we can understand it and deal with its root causes. I understand that racism is an unfortunate byproduct of terrorist attacks, and I think that's partly what motivates the terrorists. The terrorists, they want to create divisions in our society. So I think when that happens, it's very, very unfortunate because we're just playing into the hands of the people who are trying to disrupt our society and destroy our society. But as I said, I think we have an obligation to report the news and also to investigate the news and to provide as deep an understanding of these attacks as we can.
More?
Hello, over here.
Okay.
Hi. I would like to ask you, for you, what changed with the Pulitzer Award after that?
Yes.
What changed in your daily life? And on the other hand, which was the most important for you, to receive the Pulitzer or the movie?
Yeah, I guess it's a little unusual to have a Pulitzer and then have there be a Best Picture Oscar. So I don't know. I'll say, let me just tell you a little story about when we won the Pulitzer. You know, I told you that I started working at this little tiny neighborhood newspaper, but we were doing really investigative reporting, and we were challenging big government agencies and people who burned down their buildings, you know, and that sort of thing. So I remember when we won the Pulitzer Prize, it was announced in the newsroom, and there was a colleague of mine who had known me for many, many years. And she grabbed me and she said, this little newspaper I worked for, it was called the East Boston Community News. And she grabbed me and she said, wow, Michael, you know, you've come a long way since the East Boston Community News. And I said to her, you know what? No, I haven't. You know, I'm still doing the same thing. The only difference is I'm working for a newspaper that will defend me if I get sued and will pay me a living wage. So I was trying to tell her that, you know, that nothing had really changed very much. And after the Pulitzer Prize, which was a great honor, you know, life did not change very much. In fact, I remember getting phone calls from people saying, so now what? Do you get your own secretary? You're going to get your own office? And I said, nope. I said, the only thing I got is a chance to do it again. That's it. And all I can say about the Oscar is, you know, it was a lot of fun, but I also learned, somewhat to my chagrin, that the movies are a much more powerful medium than the Boston Globe. And you know, the gratifying part about that is because of the movie, there's been a whole new wave of victims that have come forward and to try to get some justice and to file lawsuits against the Catholic Church. You know, so I think that's been a really beneficial effect of the movie. And also, as I said before, it really keeps the pressure on the Catholic Church to do something. I think there are a lot of people in the church who are just saying, well, the Catholic Church has been around for 2,000 years. The Boston Globe has been around for 170 years. You know, this too shall pass. So I think it's important to not allow the church to just twiddle its thumbs and hope this goes away like most news stories do. And so I think the movie had the effect of keeping the issue alive. And honestly, I'm very grateful for that. And I know a lot of the survivors are grateful for it as well.
Hello. Hi. Is this working? Hi. I'm a journalist, and I worked as a producer as well. So I'm really curious about the producing process of the movie, as well as your work. So my question is very simple. Where are you going to dinner? Can I take you to dinner to eat some good Portuguese food? Or a beer? Or coffee? Or coffee at the airport? Or outside? I really want to meet. Can we talk for 5 minutes more?
Well, that sounds...
I'm Patricia.
I know. Well, I say, you have to deal with Nuno. He's a very tough guy. So I don't know if you can get by. So seriously, we
I'm very serious.
I'm happy to be in touch. I don't know about a beer. I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing the next day or two. But if there's something about the producing process you want to ask me about, I mean, I got very involved in the making of this movie, and I was pretty involved in the producing process, to tell you the truth. So why don't you ask me a question about producing?
No, actually, yes, because it's a very sensitive process, and I'm not sure if you discover that you like seeing your story on the film, but I think journalists don't really like to talk about themselves as much, so I think it must have been like, I don't want to be a Mark Ruffalo, but I think the process must have been long and very painful for you, because it was your words and your expressions in that scene that is very outraged about the not publishing of that. Were you there as they were filming? Were you saying to Mark, Mark, it's not like that, or it's like that, or were you letting him being you, but someone else as well?
Yeah, that's a couple of questions there, or several.
Sorry, that was dinner.
But, no, very good, very well put. You got me there. But I'll tell you that, I mean, you're right. I mean, I've said that the Oscars were a lot of fun, and they were. But, when we were reporting on this story, it was a very difficult story to do. It was a very, it was a hard time it was a difficult time of my life, which is kind of revealed to a greater extent than I wanted to in the movie. So it was not always pleasant to have to relive those years. They were two really tough years, and they took all of my life. That story took all of my life for 2 years, and a lot of it was really rough and sad. And so I was not always eager to be brought back to that time. It was sort of a delicate balance with the people making the movie. I think I said initially I was very uneasy with Mark. I was uneasy with the kinds of questions he was asking me. But eventually not eventually, but pretty quick, I told myself, hey, look, you do this to people all the time, so it's just desserts, and you got to try to help this guy out. But still, Mark found out things about me that I really didn't want him to find out, because he was a pretty good reporter. He not only did he hang around with me for many days, and he met me at my home, he came to the Globe with me. He worked with me, sat next to me while I was doing this story about the prison where the mentally ill young man was killed. But he also went and talked to some of my colleagues about me. He kind of, he did his own research. And also, I spent a lot of time talking to the screenwriter and the director, and they sort of, the three of them kind of kibitzed about how they would play me on film. And I didn't always appreciate it. Honestly. And, there is the scene where I blow up at my boss, and I was not in favor of having that scene in the movie. Initially, there were some scenes that revealed more about the problems I was having in my marriage, and I was not thrilled about that either. But, because we had a lot of mutual respect and mutual sensitivity, I think we got to a good place. But we had to work hard to get to that place. I'll tell you one little anecdote. After we had spent literally months with the writer and the director who co-wrote the screenplay, they went away for several months and they wrote their script. And they showed me the script, and I really thought it was quite brilliant. I thought the best part of the script was that it included the Globe and kind of the conspiracy of silence that had surrounded the issue of clergy sex abuse. I thought that was very powerful and very honest. And I urged them to not take that out, no matter how much pressure they felt. But then the second thing that happened is, to their great credit, they wanted our input on every single page of the script. And so Walter Robinson and myself, the guy I blow up at in the movie, Walter Robinson and myself and the director and the writer, we spent an 11-hour day in a conference room at the Globe going over that script line by line. And, you know, we would criticize language that we didn't think was appropriate or things that didn't really happen the way they were portrayed. And, you know, Josh and Tom are very, very bright people. Josh has a dual law and business school degree from Harvard University, and Tom went to the Yale Drama School. So these are very, very bright guys. And there was pushback. You know, there were a lot of points that we, you know, we debated, and we had very frank conversations about them. And I don't know if that's unprecedented. I think it's very, very unusual for people making a Hollywood movie based on a true story to want to involve the subjects that closely, because usually people do object to the way they're being portrayed, and it's a pain in the butt, and they don't want to deal with it. But to their great credit, Josh and Tom wanted to deal with everything. I mean, they wanted to know every single objection and why. And it was a long and tedious process, but I think the result is what you see, something that's incredibly authentic and very meaningful.
Okay, we will take one or two more questions, and then we will finish.
Hello, I'm Beatriz. I'm a student from Brazil. I'm here in Portugal studying only for a few months. And I wanted to ask you two different things. One is about the education. As you know, the American models of journalism education are like different, a little different of European. And I wanted to ask you if you feel that the education system as the universities affect the way that people feel about investigation work, or if this is just a struggle you have to take on the field. And the second question I wanted to ask you is about how you feel after the investigation. How did you feel about your beliefs, and how are you now about Catholic Church? Thank you.
Sure. You know, as far as the education system goes, I didn't go to journalism school, but I did take a couple of classes in journalism when I was at the university. And there was one of the journalism teachers, she really believed that the most important thing was to practice journalism and not study it. And so one of her assignments was to volunteer to write a news story for a paper and to get it published. That was the assignment. And that's how I found this little neighborhood newspaper where I ended up working, and I ended up being the editor there. But, you know, I volunteered to write a story, and I went through the process of reporting the story and having the story be edited and seeing it published in the paper. So I think an education in journalism, it sounds like a good idea to me, but I think the most important thing is to practice journalism and to start producing stories as soon as you can. I think experience is critically important. You know, there are interesting things you can learn in the classroom, but I almost think it's just as valuable to be studying political science or literature or psychology rather than taking too many journalism classes, because journalism, it's a craft. I don't think it's really an academic pursuit. So my advice is to, whatever sort of education you're getting, is to just get out there and do it as soon as you can, and to do as much of it as you can. As far as your second question goes, you know, again, the movie is quite accurate. You know, I always considered myself, you know, a lapsed Catholic who might one day go back to the church. And as a result of my experience uncovering the wall of lies presented by the Boston Archdiocese and the Catholic Church in general on this subject, I pretty much decided that was it for me and the Catholic Church, that I would have to practice my religious faith, which continues to this day. I would have to find a way to practice that in a different way. So the movie is really quite accurate. You know, there's that scene when I'm at Sasha's house and I'm on the back porch and I'm talking about how it feels to do this kind of story to someone who still considered himself a Catholic. And the dialogue in that scene really comes from a conversation that I had with Mark. And so he's basically repeating the words that I told him.
The last one.
Here, sorry.
Aqui. Hello, good evening. I'd like to know if you can describe us the wages in the United States when it comes to the profession, how the journalists in Spotlight, if they are well paid, because it's not, I know for experience that in the end of the day it's not about what the wage, but you have bills to pay anyway. And in Portugal, the wages are getting lower and lower year after year, and the excuse is the economic scenario, but it's not all about that, of course.
Well, the situation is the same in the United States. You know, I always say journalism is a calling more than a profession, but we do have bills to pay. And I'm very honest when I talk to journalism students. You know, I tell them it's harder to make a living in this profession than it has ever been, or certainly in my lifetime. But on the other hand, you know, if you really find it interesting work and you really want to make the world a better place, if you really want to do something that can create change, then being a journalist is a great profession. And maybe you want to take a chance on it for 5 years and just see how it goes and see what happens in the industry. I think the situation with the actual wages is what you're describing. I think the wages, that there are fewer jobs, and the pay is worse than it has been. No, the same trends prevail. I think you know, at the Globe and the Spotlight team, we're in a very good position. I think we probably paid more than journalists at other news organizations. But believe me, it's not a lot of money. This is no way to get rich, and it's a tough way to raise a family. You know, I'll just be very honest with you.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Here.
It's really great to be here and meet everyone.
It was a privilege to have you here. Thank you very much. Enjoy your next days in Lisbon.
Thank you.
Obrigada a todos pela participação e afirmem-se neste congresso, participem.
Well, that was great. You did a great job.
Oh,
you did a wonderful job.
Oh, yeah, you were great. You were great. Very good idea. Very interesting idea.
I hope so.